Hi, welcome to True Crime and Coke. I am your host, Eve. This podcast is about true crime, disappearances, mysteries, hauntings, and anything strange or unusual. I also drink a whole bunch of Diet Coke, and you will most certainly hear my dog snoring in every episode. You can check out my Instagram page at Serial Killers and Stuff, or my YouTube page at True Crime and Coke, and you can also email me at truecrimeandcoke@gmail.com with any questions, suggestions, or any comments. So let's get started. So lately, family annihilators have become popular because of Chris Watts and the recent Netflix documentary. So I decided I will talk about family annihilators, some of the psychology to it, and then some stories of family annihilators. So let's just get started. First, let's go into their psychological profile. And what I'm going to read is just a general psychological profile of the family annihilator killer. The phenomenon of familicide is a rather new, unexplored area within the criminology field. Professor David Wilson says, family annihilators have received little attention as a separate category of killers often treated like spree or serial killers, a view which presupposes traits such as the idea that the murderer snaps, or that after killing their partner or children, the killer may force a standoff with the police. Scholars identified 4 common areas which might be considered to be the cause of these murders: a breakdown in the family relationship and issues in getting access to the children, financial hardship, cultural honor killings, or mental illness. A study made in 2013 has shown that out of 71 family murder cases, in 59 the perpetrator was the male and 50% were between the ages of 30 to 40 years old when they committed the crime. The MO, or modus operandi, in 32% of the cases was stabbing, which is very up close and personal. And in 15% of the cases, carbon monoxide poisoning from the car exhaust was used. In 69% of the cases, the male murderer committed suicide after the murders. The profile of this specific murderer is in most cases a middle-aged man that is perceived as hardworking and a loving husband and father, usually highly educated with an undergraduate and postgraduate degree with a good job. He is usually the senior man of the house that might be paranoid, depressed, or intoxicated, or a combination of all of these. This individual might suffer from depression, psychological problems, and self-destructiveness. The family murderer usually kills each member of the family, sometimes including the pets of the house, and in most cases he will commit suicide after the killings. According to psychologist Sharon Melo, this individual is a male involved in a long-term relationship, highly possessive over his wife and family. Issues with maintaining employment, substance misuse, and domestic violence were traits present in the family annihilators' cases. The main trigger for these killings is divorce and separation. Moreover, most of the family annihilators had a personality disorder with dependent or narcissistic tendencies. It is important to highlight that in estimated 95% of the cases, the perpetrator is the head of the household and a male. Recent studies attempted to follow the more traditional views of the reason behind this type of killings, such as rage, altruism, and revenge. In his book, Familicidal Hearts, The Emotional Style of 211 Killers, Professor Websdale has divided the family annihilator into 2 groups: livid coercive and civil reputable. The livid coercive murderer is motivated by revenge and rage caused by control issues. He will show abuse tendencies towards his family that will serve as a means of self-worth by exerting authority within the household. In most cases, the livid coercive individual faces failure in marriage due to his abusive behavior, followed by the wife and children trying to leave. This will make him feel a lack of control and humiliation and lead to the killing of his entire family. The civil reputable murderer is the opposite of the livid coercive killer. His killings are motivated by genuine altruism. By killing killing his family members, he is saving them from the financial troubles and hardships, and he will almost always commit suicide afterwards. Further on, a study conducted in 2019 examined 63 research papers covering 67 studies in 18 countries made between 1980 to 2017, including familicide cases. Their findings showed that in almost all cases, the perpetrator was male, and in 50% of the cases, he committed suicide. Psychological problems, breakup in relationship problems, and financial hardship and bankruptcy were prevalent within the families involved. Ultimately, another study that had a considerable impact within the understanding of this specific type of killer was made by Yardley, Wilson, and Lyons. Looking at the motives behind the family murder cases over a span of 30 years, they divided these killers into 4 categories. 1. Self-righteous killers. This individual is in most cases the father who often blames others, especially the mother, for relationship issues or a breakup and for preventing him from having access to the children. He sees himself as the provider, and taking that away from him will make him dangerous. The main goal is to cause pain and suffering to their partners and are most likely to use the children in doing so. Will often kill the children and leave the mother alive to extend the suffering and ensure the maximum pain. In most cases, this type of family murderer will contact the mother prior to the murders and inform her about what they are going to do. His killings are executions, and they are never spontaneous. He plans his murders, and they are not a result of impulsiveness or in a fit of rage. The killings are methodical and planned out for a long time. 2. Disappointed killers. This individual believes that he was let down by those around him, most often his children and spouse. He might think that his family members are not good enough for him. He is unhappy with the choices his children made that are not according to the traditional or religious customs. Therefore, he kills his entire family in order to keep his reputation. 3. Anomic killers. This killer considers his family as an extension of his economic success. As soon as the economic status breaks down, his family no longer serves this function, so he will kill them all. His view of the family is black and white, never gray. His view doesn't reflect the dynamic role that the woman can play in the institution of family or in the economy. 4. Paranoid killers. This individual believes that his wife and children are in immediate danger or under some form of threat and they need protecting. Social services or the police or the legal system might be perceived as a threat towards their family. So, he kills his entire family in an attempt to protect them from the outside threat. In 90% of the cases, the family annihilator is a male offender coming from a good, respectable family with no criminal record. He is usually between 30 and 40 years old. This individual is perceived by the neighbors and friends as a dedicated father and loyal husband with a successful job in life. He usually suffers from personality disorders such as narcissism or dependency and has a history of psychological problems such as depression, substance misuse, paranoia, anger, or difficulty to keep a job. The main trigger for the killings is usually a breakup or financial hardship, but that depends on the different categories or subtypes of family annihilators. The MO for this type of killer is usually killing in their own house or in a secluded area chosen by the perpetrator by using a firearm, suffocation, or carbon monoxide poisoning, along with drugging the victims. Most of the family annihilators will kill themselves after the murders, but that is not a rule, and that depends highly on the motives behind the killings. The psychological profile of a family annihilator is very complex, and the research is increasing within this field. This profile appears to be very different from the more familiar profile of serial killers, mass murderers, and spree murderers. So pretty much all the studies they've done have showed the same psychological profile on the family annihilator. So normally you hear my dog snoring in the background. This might be the first time you hear her being exhausted because I just had to stop and play tug with her. So hopefully she will quiet down now, but then that means she's going to start snoring. Anyway, here are a few more facts about family annihilators. Family annihilators most often commit their crimes during the month of August, when they were more likely to be with their children due to school holidays. Cases of family annihilation have increased since the year 2000, possibly because more men feel the need to exert power and control over their families. Moreover, the increase in family killings appears to have risen with the increase in unemployment. David Wilson of Birmingham City University, UK, stated that family annihilators were typically men who had invested too heavily in a very stereotypical conception of what it means to be a husband and a father within an institution called a family. These men have a problem with women becoming more independent and career-minded. So pretty much they believe that women should be at home cooking, cleaning, and taking care of their husbands and children, and when their family does not fit this scenario, it can cause them to just kill their whole family. Family annihilators are often victims of child abuse, growing up with a sense of powerlessness, which leads them to exert strict control over their households in order to at least make it appear that they have the ideal family, though in many cases they derive their self-worth from the control they have over their families. Let's talk about Robert William Fisher. He is on the FBI 10 most wanted fugitive list for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, for first-degree murder 3 counts, and arson of an occupied structure. Robert William Fisher is wanted for allegedly killing his wife and 2 young children and then blowing up the house in which they all lived in Scottsdale, Arizona in April of 2001. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous, and the FBI is offering a reward up to $100,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of Robert William Fisher. So let's talk about him, I guess, from the beginning. Robert William Fisher's life appeared to start unraveling when his parents got divorced. Robert was the son of William Fisher and Jan Howe. He was born on April 13th, 1961. He grew up in Tucson, Arizona, with his sister, and their worlds fell apart when their mother and father divorced in 1976. According to friends and family, William in particular struggled with his parents' split and suffered long-term problems as a result of the divorce. Even as an adult working as a respiratory therapist at Mayo Clinic Hospital, Williams often discussed the impact that his parents' divorce had on him. Okay, so right there, he was devastated when his parents broke up, so he had this stereotypical, my mom and dad are going to stay together forever, and then boom, that happened. And then 2, he works as a respiratory therapist, so he is very educated. So you already have those 2. And William often discussed the impact that his parents' divorce had on him, so even as an adult, he kept talking about it. William once told a co-worker that he felt as if his life would have been different had his mother not left the family. So right there, he blames it on his mother. Before marrying Mary Cooper in 1987, Robert served as a firefighter in the Navy. It's possible his stint in the military contributed to a sense of inferiority and failure, because he once tried to unsuccessfully become a Navy SEAL. So he had the feelings of inadequacy, even though he shouldn't, because becoming a Navy SEAL is so freaking hard. Robert and Mary had 2 children, Brittany and Robert II, or Bobby. While he loved the idea of being a family man, he was cold and distant and had an awkward relationship with them. Some have even described him as cruel. It was important to him, however, that his family appeared close-knit and loving. He wanted his family to seem like a perfect one, even if it was crumbling behind closed doors. So there, you got another family annihilator profile list checkmark of him wanting his family to appear perfect on the outside. Every aspect of Brittany and Bobby's life was controlled by their father. He told them when and what to eat, when to sleep, when to wake up, and even what to wear. Robert wanted a son that he could hunt and fish with, but Bobby didn't share his father's hobbies and passions. Robert was unable or unwilling to accept this and chalked it up to a phase his boy would grow out of. Rather than teaching his son and daughter how to swim, he opted to teach them the hard way by just throwing them off of a boat. Those who knew Robert said he showed more affection for his dog Blue than he did for his own children. Robert William Fisher even controlled the house his family lived in. The walls had to be painted white, and only a minimal number of pictures were permitted to be hung. Meanwhile, Robert didn't associate with his extended family for fear that he would get close to one of his relatives, only to have that person abandon him. So there's been a couple of different descriptions of Robert and Mary's relationship. The first is that Robert was domineering and controlling to the point that Mary was a doormat who never stood up to her husband. Then the second description comes from one of the couple's neighbors, and based on his testimony, Mary comes across as a strong woman who didn't roll over in the face of her husband's domineering ways. Wade Ricksock told CNN they did not have a happy marriage. They screamed constantly. Everybody heard it. You could hear it in the house next door, and you never really heard him scream, which is kind of weird. I mean, he had a way about him, but you never heard him scream. You always heard his wife screaming, things like, "You're worthless. I could have done better than you. We should get a divorce." So for a time, Robert and Mary attended a Baptist church in Scottsdale where Robert participated in the men's ministry. However, at some point, Robert walked away from the church, though Mary continued to attend. In 1998, the couple went to the church's senior pastor for marital counseling. The session occurred shortly after Robert confessed to co-workers that he'd had a one-night stand with a prostitute, and he was fearful that Mary would find out that the encounter was the reason he had been sick for several months with a urinary tract infection. Robert told a co-worker that he wanted to work on being a better man. He was going to recommit himself to his faith and his wife and children, remarking that he could not live without his family. This comment seemed to suggest that he'd rather take his own life than to get a divorce. Mary had expressed to several friends that she did plan on divorcing Robert, but she had no idea the lengths that her husband was willing to go to maintain tight control over his family and their fate. Anyone who exerts that much control over every aspect of his life can be undone by even the slightest slip. The events of April 9th, 2001 led to Robert William Fisher becoming the 475th fugitive added to the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list on June 29th of 2002. On the night of April 9th, neighbors heard Robert and Mary arguing loudly in their home. The following morning, approximately 10 hours later, Robert murdered Mary by slitting her throat and then putting a bullet in the back of her head. Then he moved on to his children, and he killed them by slitting their throats from ear to ear, so very up close and personal. At 8:42 a.m., the neighbors of the Fishers awoke to a thundering boom. The Fisher house had exploded and gone up in flames, creating such a concussion that the explosion was felt up to almost half a mile away. The large explosion was followed by several smaller explosions, which were believed to have been caused by the presence of firearm ammunition or paint cans in the house. During the investigation, the police discovered that a gas line had been pulled out of the furnace at the back of the house to hide evidence, and the flame from a lit candle sparked the explosion. When firefighters were finally able to extinguish the blaze, the bodies of a woman and 2 children were found inside, incinerated. Mary, aged 38, Brittany, aged 12, and Bobby, aged 10, were obviously dead. Robert William Fisher was nowhere to be found. Investigators say Robert is the lone suspect in the case, and they believe he had a 10-hour window to escape. On July 19, 2001, a state arrest warrant was issued for Robert William Fisher. Police charged the former husband and father with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. But the hunt for Robert began immediately after the fire, and it didn't take long for investigators to find clues as to his movements immediately prior to and following the crime. Investigators found footage of Robert at an ATM on the night before the murders. The amount of money he took out of the ATM was odd, just $280. A week after the murders, Mary Fisher's 4Runner SUV was found miles away in the woods near Young, Arizona. Robert's beloved dog was found guarding the vehicle, but Robert himself was not there. So that does go against the other family annihilators where they killed their pets. However, he supposedly loved his pet more than his family, so that would make sense. The area where the Forerunner was found was one that Robert knew intimately, as it was his frequent camping spot. Just days before Robert's car was discovered, now retired Scottsdale Police Detective T.J. Geron received a phone call from a couple who saw a man walking towards the highway. As they passed him, the wife recognized him as Robert William Fisher. It is assumed that Robert left the area on foot and could literally be anywhere. Police searched the nearby area, but they admitted that they didn't do a good enough job of checking the many caves that dot the area. In February of 2004, a man was arrested in Vancouver, British Columbia by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP. The suspect bore a striking resemblance to Robert, but fingerprints showed it was not him. The police held him for about a week until a family member correctly identified him. Some individuals who are familiar with Robert believe he committed suicide. According to some friends, when Mary kicked Robert out of the house, Robert went to the woods and contemplated suicide. Others, including many investigators, believe Robert is still alive and left his Forerunner and his dog behind as a red herring. As an avid outdoorsman, Robert would be capable of living off the land for lengthy periods. Many tips have come into the FBI, but it is not known if they've provided any legitimate information as to Robert's whereabouts. One thing the tips haven't led to is the location and capture of Robert William Fisher. Almost 20 years after the murders of Mary, Brittany, and Bobby, there is still no sign of the man who took the lives of his wife and children by slicing them open. So, that's what's scary. He is still out there. I don't think he killed himself. Some important facts about Robert William Fisher. Robert has a bad back and may need pain medication. Scars from previous surgery can be seen on his lower back. Due to his back problems, he may walk with an exaggerated erect posture and his chest pushed out. Robert has a gold crown on his upper left first bicuspid tooth. He chews tobacco. He is an avid hunter and fisherman and should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Robert has blue eyes, brown hair, weighs 190 pounds, and is 6 feet tall. He may have been having an affair with a coworker. Robert likely changed his appearance and may have long hair and or facial hair. In 2001, the television show America's Most Wanted received a phone call that the Scottsdale Police Department believes was placed by Robert. The call came from Chester, Virginia. According to the FBI, Robert may be working in the medical field or living in a small town, working a menial job. So, thing is, if you see pictures of him young, he would be very recognizable. On age progression, it would be almost impossible to tell it was him. Looks like he could change his looks really easy. So he's still out there. Who knows? He could be like John List and have a new family. So I will end this episode here. I will do several episodes, shorter episodes, about some family annihilators. Unfortunately, there are several to talk about, from John List to Chris Watts. So have a good evening.